Buongiorno a tutti. Prima di iniziare a parlare in inglese, questo è un panel che ovviamente per ragioni linguistiche faremo tutto in inglese. Volevo ringraziare Chiara per le splendide parole che ha espresso nei confronti miei personali e di tutto il Consiglio nazionale. Volevo anche tranquillizzare ovviamente Chiara sul fatto che questo Consiglio nazionale ha come sua strategia quella di perseguire e rafforzare la nostra presenza come commercialisti, come professional accountants nell'ambito della sostenibilità. Crediamo molto in questa, l'ho detto anche ieri durante i lavori di apertura, crediamo molto in questo ruolo, in questa funzione, ma soprattutto crediamo che sia necessario diciamo, gestire e non subire il cambiamento normativo, quindi essere parte attiva all'interno degli standard setter a livello ovviamente internazionale. Ma adesso, now, let's talk in English. Let me express my personal joy, sincere joy, and my honor, of course, to have here Alan Johnson on my right-hand side, the president of IFAC. Please, a great applause for Alan. Thank you very much.
Grazie.
And on my left-hand side, a great honor, of course, to have here in person Mark Vassen, incoming president of Accountancy Europe. Thank you, Mark, to be here in person.
Thank you.
I wish you to thank you sincerely because, of course, I know how difficult it has been for you to be here. I make a sort of stalker activity with Alan and with Mark to have them here because it's important for us, for our institute, to have a concrete and real demonstration of how important it is to be present in international activity. I like to sort of to break international atmosphere. Let me say also that this is the first national conference, as Chiara has told before, that we have decided to dedicate to sustainability. And this is the first national conference that we have organized with the new board, the new CNDC board, where, of course, I'm the president. So your presence here is a demonstration of how strategic is for us the sustainability. First of all, in light of the standard setting explanation, I heard with great attention what Chiara has told us. I would like to analyze with both of you the challenges that our profession is called to deal with in the next future in terms of opportunities, in terms of criticalities. Yesterday, we had the opportunity during the speeches and the panels that we had yesterday to underline two different aspects of sustainability. The first one is, I think, clear to all my colleagues that sustainability is not just a specialization field because it interests everyone. It's not something for a few passionate of climate preservation. And secondly, we have to manage it and not to suffer it. It's a sort of cultural transition. So our main interest, speak in terms of CNDCC, our institute, is to transfer to our colleagues all the skills, technical skills, that are necessary to be main actor of this cultural transition. In my opinion, the reliability of information is really crucial, is essential for right economical and political decision. At the same time, on the political field, on the political side, in Italy, I don't know if the same all over the world, but in Italy in particular, we need to demonstrate the importance of our profession, especially in the sustainability chain. I mean in terms of accounting, reporting, assurance, finance, and something like this. So we have to work very hard also with the governmental agency because we need to stay around the tables where the regulations are written because we have to support the governmental agencies. In the last 3 years, we had a sort of, how can I say, an earthquake, something absolutely unpredictable. We had pandemic event, we have energy crisis, we had also the threat of nuclear threat. So it's absolutely clear that we can speak about sustainability in the same way we have done 3 years before. We have to change our point of view, we have to change our approach to sustainability. To do this, we need to be present to be present inside the international board. Yesterday, I was around the table during our dinner with Mark. I told to Mark that Italian Institute of Accountants wants to be main actor and not just a spectator of the international activity. I had the great luck to spend about 10 years of my international experience in the IFAC that I consider, and I can say public, that I consider my international family. And I have the honor to stay around in the IFAC board with Alan Johnson. So I'm fully aware how important it is to be actor around that boards, how important it is to contribute to the right of the international laws, because someone has told today morning that in the future we are working to have regulations across borders and jurisdictions, the same grammar, the same language, and Italian accountants must be the actor of this cultural revolution. So let's start. I want to stop to speak myself because I don't want to be the main actor of this panel. Let's start with Alan. I prepare just a few questions for both of you. I would like to ask to Alan, based on your long-standing experience around international board, how do you think that the attitude towards sustainability has changed in these last years, and what trend do you see? Thank you, Alan.
Buongiorno a tutti. So, let me maybe start by thanking Albano and Chiara for inviting me to join you today. I managed to get here just in time because I was actually in Africa at a sustainability conference until Thursday, and I got back in time yesterday morning to be able to come to Bologna. And I'll also like to reflect on what Albano said. Italy is not an actor and has not been an actor in this discussion, to be very honest. I had the opportunity of attending the G20 and the B20 meetings last year when Italy was in the presidency. And I have to say, your Prime Minister, President Mario Draghi, really raised the profile of sustainability during the term of presidency of 1 year of Italy. So you are on the stage, and you have helped us make sustainability mainstream and a top priority, not just for Italy, not just for Europe, but also the world. I'd also like to recognize the time that Albano and I spent on the IFAC board together for 3 years. It was very rewarding for me because Albano brought some relevant, practical understanding of real issues, because sometimes when you sit on a global board, you can be a little bit detached from the reality around the world. And what Albano did was really helped us get a better understanding of the issues that society faces and make sure we as a profession are responding to them. And I'd also like to recognize Chiara, who joined the board 2 years ago. She's now finishing her 3rd year. And again, she has raised our understanding and profile of sustainability, which, by the way, when I joined the board in 2015, I actually said, what is IFAC's response to the SDGs? And the response I got was blank faces. What's that got to do with us? Which I must say surprised me. So thanks to you, Albano, and Chiara, we have moved on very far. I'd also like to recognize the role of Accountancy Europe, and Mark, good luck in your presidency, which you start at the beginning of next year. Because again, Accountancy Europe has played a very important role as a voice of the profession within Europe, to help design all the architecture that you have seen that the European Union is working on, of course, with the great work of EFRAG that's taking place. So thank you very much for what you've been doing. Now, in terms of what do I think the attitudes are? Well, they're changing, and they're changing rapidly. What I think we are now seeing is society is becoming intolerant of the talk. Talk, no action. What we've had is lots and lots of talking about the need to address sustainability, but quite honestly, really no concrete plans. I mean, let's be honest. we had COP26 last year, which means there have been 26 years of discussions. But is the world in a better place today with respect to sustainability? I don't think so. And let's remind ourselves what sustainability means. And it was defined in 1987, and I would ask you to read it if you haven't, so you really get the genesis of what this is all about. Because Brundtland, who commissioned the report for the United Nations in 1987, said that sustainability is about meeting the needs of the present without compromising the ability of future generations to meet their own needs. So if we were to ask ourselves today, are we living up to that? I think we would all agree in this room, we're not, because we are compromising the future generation, because we are consuming more than we produce, we are living beyond the planetary boundaries. It is absolutely unsustainable, so therefore it is time to act. You've seen the fire. I was in Italy for the summer. The fires that were taking place, the flooding that was taking place in Italy, the impact on agriculture, the impact on infrastructure. All of this has led to stress. It has led to economic degradation. It's impacting sustainable growth. And of course, we simply cannot go on as business as usual. So it is time that we begin to address it, because to meet the Sustainable Development Goals with the timeline of 2030, we have just over 7 years to go. So we've done a lot, but we've not done enough. And we've got so much more to do to accelerate in the next 7.5 years.
Thank you, Alan. I couldn't agree more about what you told us. Let me add just my personal idea. We need to gain a role in the society. We are technical, but we have to be also social consultants. I mean, we have to transfer we have to foster our role inside the society. So let's pass with Mark Vassen. Mark, thank you very much to be here. In light of what Chiara has told us, we have two sets of standards, one international, the other one European. In my personal opinion, there is a risk of overlap. And I'm curious to know which is your idea, or better, how do we ensure that the standard is applicable and practitioners are able to manage with this in their professional activity? I think that we have to apply the principle of the think small first approach, because, and I speaking of course on the side of professional accountants, when you read the standards now, you have some complication in terms of comprehension of the standards, and in terms also of the way that we can follow to apply these standards, especially in the small and medium entities, in the SMEs. Thank you, Mark.
Thank you, Albano. Let me also first say thank you very much for inviting me here. It's a real pleasure for me as the incoming president of Accountancy Europe to have the invitation and to be here in person. The Italian profession is a very important member of the European accounting family, and I was very pleased when we were discussing this last night, Albano, to hear from you, that you really want to be, a very active member in the international discussions and in the Accountancy Europe discussions, also on this topic where Chiara already has been involved for many, many years and been a huge contributor to the discussions. But no, that is very much appreciated. And I would also think that the topic of this conference here today, and I'm impressed, by the way, by the magnitude of it, is so hugely important, right? Because I think it will also define my presidency. I think this whole topic is transformational for our profession, and I'm very much always on the relevance of profession. How do we provide the relevance to society? This is a topic where we can really prove this, and we can help, as you said, by helping to make sure that we have standards that provide all the stakeholders that need that information with transparency and effective standards. And that's on our basis on our technical expertise. And then obviously we have to add the trust to it by providing the assurance. But also, and I agree with you fully, right, we also, for the small and medium businesses, we are also the trusted advisors, and we also, I think, have a role in helping the small and medium businesses to navigate this whole agenda in the coming years, because there's a lot of regulations and other things coming in that direction. Having said that, to your question, yeah, I think Chiara said it out well. As Accountancy Europe, we actually have been supportive of both. So we have been supportive of the development of the ISSB, and as many of you may know, we actually wrote quite an authoritative paper in 2019 that was actually arguing that we needed to have a consolidation at an international level. Because you may know there were a lot of standards in the past. We had GRI, we had SASB, we had CDSB, we had a whole alphabet soup of standards. And at least now we have one initiative at a global level that Lee White was talking about that consolidates all of this. So I think that's an important one, and that we fully support as a profession. But also true, we have our own agenda in Europe, and that's what Chiara was saying. We have our own political imperatives, and we maybe have more ambition than some other parts of the world in terms of the EU Green Deal. So we definitely also need to have our own European standards. Now, the question is, how do we bring this together? And I think it was alluded to. Very much we believe in that these two are not per se in conflict, and I'm saying that to what Chiara was saying. Okay, they may have different perspectives, but they may not be in conflict. And what we should be looking at is how these two intersect. Yeah, where the touch points are. And I was at the SASB board for a couple of years, and you know the SASB board is more American, so it's more driven by investors. But also investors, when you speak to them now, they do want to know the societal impact of a company. They want to understand what you're doing with the environment. They don't want to know whether you treat your employees rightly. And if you don't, it will actually be something that will impact on the investability of the company. So a lot of these impacts are also investor relevant. So there will be quite a broad intersection of things where we can come together. And then where we think in Europe we need to go further because we have own legislation, or we have topics that we want to go further and the world doesn't, then obviously we have the possibility to do. Now, for the people in the room here, I think, yes, initially we will focus clearly on the European standards, because that's what we want to know, but I would agree with Lee White, keep an eye also on the international standards, because the Commission has said in the CSRD, we want to make sure that in Europe we follow international to the greatest extent possible, something that as a Council Europe we have welcomed. So I hope that in this way, we can have international as a core and then build on that from a European perspective. I think that's how they come together.
Thank you, Mark. Yes, I think that we have to foster the cooperation among the Italian, of course I'm speaking of Italy because we are in Italy, Italian standard setter with the European standard setter, with international standard setter. We have to speak the same language, of course, because as clear, we have to use the same grammar all over the world. Absolutely. Okay, thank you so much, Mark. Alan, let's come back to IFAC. What should IFAC and professional accountancy organization, PAOs, such as my professional accountancy organization, CNDCEC, be doing to prepare current and future professional accountants to play their role in helping address the sustainability challenges we face?
Thanks, Albano. Well, I think the first thing we should be doing is exactly having this discussion in this room, making sure that we understand that we have a very important role to play as professional accountants. Because let's be honest, we are, if not the only, well, we certainly are the only global profession in the world that has a public interest mandate written into what we do. So therefore, if we have a public interest mandate, it is inevitable that we have to be involved in helping the world move from where we are today to where we need to get to tomorrow and in future years. We have to perform our public interest mandate. So the one thing I would say we at IFAC have been doing is we've made sustainability part of our core strategic objective for the profession. And the good thing is certainly in the last 4 years since I've been deputy president and now president, I find that sustainability is now on the priorities of all of our member bodies. In fact, you can't go to a conference anywhere in the world where the theme is not about sustainability, prosperity, and economic and social development. I was in Nigeria earlier this week. I came back yesterday morning, and their theme was sustainability for a prosperous economy. So the good news is it is now a core priority for our profession. And what we've now got to do is make sure everybody understands that we have an important role to play to help organizations move from what I call commitments and pledges, because we all know it's so easy to make a commitment to each other. But if we are not going to be around in 20 or 30 years' time to deliver that commitment, it's not worth very much. One of the things we as a profession need to do is to make sure that organizations and governments, and let's be honest, it's not just about organizations, the public sector is a very important player in this in terms of setting frameworks and strategies and providing the environment in which organizations, both large and small, can operate. So we have an important role to make sure that we hold people to account for what they commit to and what they pledge, but more importantly, we put in the reporting frameworks so we can track, are we on progress in delivering? And let's be honest, none of us in this room, I guess, I can't see all of you, but some of you will be young enough to be here in 2040, will be, or 2050, will be around to be held accountable for the commitments we made in 2022. That's the reality. The politicians won't be here, the corporate leaders won't be here, but the citizens of the world will be. So therefore, what we've got to do is to ensure that commitments are made with very clear timelines, step by step, year by year. There we can measure progress. Because as far as I'm concerned, it's less now about commitments and pledges, and it's more about actions. And our role as professional accountants is to make sure that those actions are clear, they're achievable, that we have capacity to deliver them. There's no point making commitments if we don't have the capacity to deliver them, because they'll never get delivered. And then make sure that the reporting frameworks are in place, which inform society, both investors, all stakeholders, and broader society, that we are on track. As I said, it's about not impacting the future generation, and that's why we have to make sure that actions we take today are consistent with the pledge of the Brundtland Report. It's all about SDGs. It's not only environment, by the way. I know we talk a lot about environment, which is important because of the existential threats we all face, but it's also about higher levels of corporate governance and transparency, both in the public sector and in the private sector. It's also about social issues, which Chiara mentioned so clearly. Are we doing the right thing for society? Because let's be honest, businesses only have a right to exist if they do the right thing in society. Sometimes we forget that. We think that the priority for a company is to make returns for shareholders. Yes, but they can only do that if they do the right thing for society. This is all very circular. If you don't do the right thing for society, you will not deliver sustainable returns for investors. And that's why the chart that Chiara showed at the top, the right-hand side, which is about the impact on society, affects the left-hand side, which is about economic, sustainable value creation. Without the right, you can't deliver the left, and without the left, you're unlikely to deliver the right. So they're not indivisible. I know it says not equal. I understand the point, and she's right, but they are integrated and indivisible. And our job as professional accountants is to make sure we bring the two together on a consistent basis, rather than seeing them as two separate blocks of work. And why professional accountants? Because we are the nexus, we are at the center of all information that is provided both within an organization and to the markets, the public. So therefore, we have to make sure there's consistency in the strategies, in the plans, in the operations, in the reporting. So we have a very important role. And I just want to say one thing. Professor Mervyn King from South Africa, I'm sure a lot of you have heard about him, said many years ago that accountants can save the world. Now, a lot of people laughed at that statement, but actually I was with Mervyn King last week in Madrid at the PIOB meeting, and I'm seeing him on the 31st of October in South Africa. And I genuinely believe that we can save the world. All of us in this room and all of the commercialisti sitting around Italy, we can save Italy, we can save the world.
Great, great. Thank you, Alan. So we can say that Italian accountants are on the right way. Today is a demonstration of these strategies, and secondly, that we are on track. So let's go. I totally agree with you. Mark, let's come back to SMEs, because you know, in Italy we have 99.9% of SMEs. Mm-hmm. So for commercialisti, for Italian accountants, is of course a sort of day-by-day problem to manage the relation with the SMPs. Yesterday, during the different panels and speeches on this stage, it's been clear that sustainability is not just an issue to care for listed companies or big providers or producers and something like this. So we have, yesterday we had the opportunity to analyze how is near for the SMPs the sustainability management approach. How is near for the SMPs the necessity, not the opportunity, the necessity to switch towards a sustainability approach. So how do you consider the sustainability schemes developed as applicable to SMPs?
Yeah, so the CSRD at the moment scopes out the SMEs from the reporting obligations in the first instance, right? So that's, but that doesn't mean that SMEs are not affected by this. And I think there are several ways in which they are affected. And maybe you discussed them yesterday, but let me just go through my logic of it. Well, first of all, I think it's the trickle-down effect, right? Because all the largest companies now have these new requirements of having to report, and then will also have to report on what's happening in the value chain. So that's certainly one where the SMEs are going to be involved at some point, because they are part of that value chain, and therefore will be asked by the larger companies to also provide the information. We all heard this morning already from the first speaker, the access to finance that may be impacted by the sustainability requirements that banks are under. So I think that's another one. And of course, well, if I look, consumers are already changing their views on what is good and bad, and actually more and more people are actually making choices based on whether a company, you know, is doing the right thing. I can tell from my daughter, she looks, you know, where she buys her clothes by using an app and see whether it's responsibly sourced, and going more to vintage. Similarly, so it's the next generation also that will drive some of this agenda, and again that will also then affect, I guess, business models of SMEs. You know, as the world is changing. I think Alan made an important point. That's the public sector. We see in some countries, we see that procurement rules are being changed, right? I think in the UK and Sweden, where examples that were given to me were already, you know, sustainability criteria are coming in the procurement rules of public sector. So I think there are many ways in which also SMEs are getting to be impacted. And I think, as I said, right, so therefore I think for the SMPs to understand these effects and to actually have these conversations with the clients that you have on, okay, well, how is this going to actually affect my business model? Where do I, you know, see the big risks coming from, whether it is climate or other trends that I see? I think we're perfectly positioned to do that, right, as a trusted advisor. So I think that's, the major impacts that I would see, and where we have to prepare for as SMPs.
Thank you, Mark. In my opinion, it's a question of awareness. I mean, also for the SMEs, but also for the professional accountants. Yep. So we have to work this is an example. Our meeting today is an example. We want to transfer this awareness to our colleagues and to SMEs in Italy.
Yeah, and we try also within Accountancy Europe to do that. So we bring together, you know, SMPs to discuss these issues, but also to come up with helpful tools and examples of what we can do, case studies of how SMPs are actually changing their practice and incorporating sustainability into their practice, but also just a simple checklist and other tools that can be used.
We have to improve, in my opinion, Mark, we have to improve also our sort of economy of scale, a sort of cooperation also among the different PAOs all over Europe, because we have to put all around the table our experience in the single countries in order to share our knowledge of the situation.
It's a very important point that you're making, Albano, and thank you for that, because I think and the experience that we had, right, if we look at the EFRAG standards that are being set, where Chiara is a member of, there are 13 different topics, and you talk about water, you talk about biodiversity, circularity, but you're also talking about the workforce and affected communities, you talk about human rights. These are all very, very specific topics that need specialists.
Correct.
Right? And these specialists are limited in terms of numbers. So also, you know, as a profession, we need to kind of try to pool resources as much as we can, also in the working groups and in responding to it, so that we pool on these resources, and not all actually. Obviously, you need to build some capacity yourself, but also pool. And definitely that's a role also that we want to play through Accountancy Europe.
Thank you, Mark. Thank you very much. Last question. What do governments and companies need to do to accelerate the drive to more sustainable economies and society, Alan?
Thanks, Albano. So let me first start with what I believe governments need to do. And, you know, it was good to listen to the presentation from the Vice President of ABI this morning to see how they're changing their role in terms of financing. Just a statistic here, and I heard you say 99-point-something% of Italian companies are SMEs. Yeah. Well, across the world, SMEs account for between 40 and 50% of GDP. In Italy, it might be even a little bit higher than that. Yeah. But the reality today is that only 3% of the trillions of dollars that are being invested in the green economy goes to SMEs. So SMEs account for 50% of GDP, but only 3% of investments go to SMEs. So we have a huge financing issue. So the first thing I would like the government to do, and through the help of all of you in this room who advise SMEs, is to make sure that we change the funding model to make it possible for SMEs to access finance in order to get on this journey of sustainability. Number two, we shouldn't again look at SMEs as a separate group, because I can tell you from my working experience, the large companies across the world are critically dependent on SMEs. The supply chains that exist and the business models have significant componentry of SMEs in large corporates. I spent 35 years at Unilever, and the core of our business was dependent on the impact and input from SMEs. And we spent a huge amount of time making sure that our SMEs were sustainable, because if they were sustainable, we at Unilever, no matter how large we are or were, would be sustainable too. So not only do governments have a role to assist the SMEs with our help as professional accountants, but large corporates also have a role to make sure that SMEs, not only do they have a role, they have a need, because if SMEs are not sustainable, they will not be sustainable. So I maybe would stop there. Of course, all the frameworks and the targets need to be put in place. And the other thing I would say is we should avoid the temptation of just reporting. We should talk much more about what will we do. So what is our strategy? And therefore, all of these, bodies, the I would say that the organizations that provide oversight for the corporate sector, for us as professional accountants, need to make sure that we do the right thing for society. And, I've never liked the phrase that we use in the UK, which is comply or explain. I've never liked that. I think you should comply and explain. Because if you give people the alternative to explain why they don't comply, what happens? They never comply, or they don't comply fully. So I've been fighting this silly term of comply or explain. And in my world, I say to the people I work with, we comply and we explain why it is important to comply. And I would like that as part of the corporate governance codes, corporate governance codes everywhere across the world, to change the mindset and the culture. You used the word culture, right? Yesterday. Culture is important. So, governments play an important role, but so do big corporations. But for me, the key to getting this done is to helping SMEs to become more sustainable. Thank you.
Thank you, Alan. Also because, let me say, also because SMEs are a part of the supply chain of the large company. So it's a sort of whole approach, holistic approach, and we have to, of course, to consider also the SMEs. So last question for Mark. Mark, beyond reporting and assurance, which have or will have standardizing mechanism, how do you consider the finance taxation of environmental impact? What is currently the challenge in this area?
Sorry, on the taxation?
Yeah, taxation.
Yeah, so if we and that is probably a point, right, where you say, okay, it is important that we in Europe create a system of reporting, because that will provide transparency. Then we have the assurance requirements on it that provides trust. But obviously it's not enough. And I sat on a few panels in the past with Hans Hogevorst. Hans Hogevorst was the chairman of the International Accounting Standards Board, but he was also a minister of finance in the Netherlands. And he always said, yes, on this topic, he says, yeah, it's fine that we provide transparency, that we put a light on certain things, but you also need other measures, right? Also, politicians need to take policy measures in order to direct. And I think that is your question, right? So there are a number of initiatives already in Europe that are looking at energy taxes and making energy taxes, even more linked to carbon emissions. They are looking at the emission trading schemes that are out there to make sure that they are not, too accommodating for those industries that are polluting too much. There is a proposal on the table on carbon border taxation. So if you cross a border, you come from a third country and you're actually importing into the European Union, there would be a surcharge if you're coming from a polluting industry. So it's all these proposals that are on the table that go much further than the reporting agenda. And I think they are crucially important as well to drive this agenda. And we clearly need to monitor and understand what impact these have. But they are not easy. I understand that many of these are now at the council, and I think the real challenge there is, first of all, we have member states with different issues, and I think some are more dependent on fossil fuels than others. If we can see in the whole energy discussion that we have at the moment, so getting all member states to agree is going to be a challenge. And the other one is a very important one from my perspective, is that also some of these taxes can actually hit the poorest people hardest. So it needs to be proportionate, and you also must make sure that when you do this, you need to have a just transition, and make sure that you mitigate those. And within the Council of Europe, again, we're following all of these proposals very carefully and make sure that our members understand the implications of it.
Yesterday, during my opening speech, I underlined to my colleagues that it's important for us to foster our interaction with our government in order to introduce a sort of taxation premium for sustainability SMEs. This is our challenge, and we want to reach this goal in the future. So, thank you very much. Thank you, Alan. Thank you, Mark, for this very, very, very interesting speech for you, your precious idea, your precious support to our CNDCEC. Thank you so much.